This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic.
And this is Matt Pegas.
And this is episode number 1, and we are doing this cool fucking podcast that's gonna maybe tank our careers, but we're psyched.
Yeah, no, great to be here. We've been talking about Dan and I have been talking about starting a podcast for some time. We're both authors. I'm sorry, I'm probably getting ahead of ourselves.
No. You are an author. You were published. You were published by Terror House.
Right. My book Dragon Day came out with Terror House back in June, and Dan is also looking for a home for his first novel. I don't know how much he wants to talk about it, but it's called Nutcracker, and I read it, and it's very good.
I could not agree with Matt more. Nutcracker is awesome, and it is looking for a home. So, people should publish it. It's great. It's my baby. Nutcracker by Dan Baltic.
But I think we bring up being authors and being writers not merely in a pretentious manner, but because that's pretty much why we're starting this podcast. Wouldn't you say, Dan? Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is not just to promote ourselves. This is honestly born of our talking about trying to get published after writing novels that are like honest, and because they are honest about our experiences as young and maybe not quite as young in my case white men, it is not really publishable in the publishing industry. And
right.
We realize that there are very few publishers who will publish this stuff independently, stuff like Nutcracker and Dragon Day and Terror House being one of them, but there's not too many. And there's like virtually no podcasts, talking about the literature that exists outside of the gated community, the very white bread, actually, gated community of the publishing world and the entertainment world.
Certainly. And for me, I would say, really starting this podcast arose out of our conversations. Dan and I met online earlier this year. I don't think it's doxable info that we met on Justin Murphy's forum, which is a great place for kind of creators of an independent and perhaps dissident persuasion.
Indie thinkers.
Indie thinkers, Justin Murphy's forum. We sort of got introed as being two people working on writing projects. Dan was, I think, just finishing up his novel at the time. This is back in like March. I was already set up to publish with Terror House, but we connected pretty quickly, just over a mutual interest in literature and publishing. And we also found, and I don't want to say too much about this, but we also found that we both work, or have worked in the past at least, on sort of the more businessy side of the entertainment industry. So we have a sort of up close and personal look at what the quote unquote sanctioned zone for art and for literature looks like, and how the deck is stacked pretty fiercely against straight white males. And both of, again, as Dan said, both of us being of that demographic category, we found ourselves struggling to find places for our work to be published, to thrive, to be talked about. And then, as I said earlier, my book came out in June, and I was somewhat satisfied with the release, etc. But definitely, I was struck by the fact that there were very few sort of podcasts to go on and promote my work. Terror House Radio, which is the podcast for the publisher, is definitely a great outlet, and I enjoyed my interview with Matt Forney. There's a couple other places. A lot of the other podcasts I went on were sort of like dissident right podcasts that just would cover my book, just as like a side thing.
But not explicitly literary.
Not explicitly literary,
yeah.
Which is what we would like to do. I think that there's a need to really focus on this, the dissident right, frog Twitter, whatever you want to call it, as a literary sphere. There's some focus on that with Terror House, but our goal is to be another voice in the room, another place for kind of up and coming writers to promote their work, and also another place to talk about literature and talk about art.
But not only the dissident right, really just anyone who is writing, and to an extent, I mean, this is a topic in and of itself, is anyone who is outside of the cathedral, as our man Moldvug would call it, a member of the dissident right? Perhaps. But I would say, a lot of art, a lot of literature, if it seeks to be honest, will not be at home in the publishing industry, in the media industry. And as such, what we are trying to do is find build an outlet for highlighting that type of work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whether it's right-wing or whatever.
Whether it's right-wing, left-wing, or anything in between. You bring up a good point. I think it's an open question right now that you hear not only people that are politically dissident, but even people who are on a much more mild basis, like the sort of IDW types. It's a conversation right now. Like, are you automatically on the right if you're not in line with the overwhelming progressive ideology of the mainstream left and of the media? I think that's an open question whether that makes you right-wing. I mean, in many ways it does not. And a lot of the greatest exemplars and the most successful authors of the sort that we are talking about, Delicious Tacos coming to mind immediately,
exactly,
are not of the right at all and have even been described as being of the left. So I call it the dissident right because that's kind of how I got into all this. And I think to an extent, Dan, you as well, the whole quote-unquote red pill sphere,
yes,
you get into that. It's at least aesthetically right-wing, right?
Yeah.
But as you get further into it, you realize that a lot of people who end up here are not. They're certainly not dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, to say the least. But they're not even necessarily philosophically too far to the right. There are people all over the map, and we are New Right. We're called New Right as a podcast, but I think that we are a place of inclusion, are we not? Of different opinions, etc.
We are open to everyone, even the people we hate. Well, what I was going to say is that what I think unites everyone outside of the cathedral, as it were, is we've all had our red pilling moments. We're all red pilled in some form or capacity, and that is what gives us the ability to write honestly, because if you live in the cathedral and you're blue pill, and excuse the use of these metaphors if they seem juvenile, but
what does it mean to you to be red pilled? Like, how would you define that? It might be worth just unpacking this just for once and for all. Being red pilled, basically, you can be red pilled. The whole 4chan element of it was you could be red pilled on any number of topics, but interestingly, I think it basically whittles down to a view of reality that certain biological realities having to do. Okay, I don't know.
No, you're right.
That's what I wanted to say, though.
No,
having to do with
right.
gender, having to do with dating, having to do with race. Like it doesn't have to be like KKK hood stuff. It's just like a basic respect.
Basic respect for natural hierarchies. And there's a project on the left to ignore the existence of hierarchies across sex, across gender, race, various abilities, disabled, able-bodied, what have you. On the political left, there is a movement to collapse all of these categories, or perhaps even invert them. And to me, being red-pilled means you understand that they are real. You understand that there are natural hierarchies, that you see a guy who walks into a bar and is 6'3" and like 240 pounds of muscle. that guy has certain biological advantages over like me. Or you see, John Nash, well, you don't see him now, he's dead, but like, so solving like really complicated equations and problems, not many people can do that. And there is a hierarchy to all things. And this is something that, the left will tell you doesn't exist. And their art is premised on the absence of this, on the presence of a blank slate on which anything can be built. But all you have to do is have eyes to realize that nature creates distinctions. And that is the red pill, that there are natural distinctions that you can riff on, you can respond to them, you can, maybe you are like born with an ugly face and you work out all the time to get super jacked to make up for it. I don't know. Maybe you're pretty dumb, but you work really hard to, become, I don't know, a business executive despite that. There are ways to work around natural limitations, but they do not negate those limitations. They do not remove them.
And we have to still be honest about them. I mean, I think that you summed it up so well. That's what the red pill means to me as well. And it doesn't have to be a big extreme thing. It's just this basic honesty about things.
And once you accept certain, red pilling truths, then you're, sets you free. I mean, but the price is you can't, stay in the cathedral. You gotta leave.
Right. Yeah.
And so we left, but we are still in it. Just people don't know that, we actually have these beliefs. And so that, I think actually provides, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, a certain impetus or fire to do this podcast, because we have to listen to this fucking crazy shit all day, and it, drives us crazy about like diversity and inclusion riders to agreements and stuff of that nature.
Yes.
And how you're not looking for the best writer, not looking for a particular type of story, not even caring what the writer's written about before, but you're looking for a BIPOC writer.
No, absolutely. I think that provides an impetus. There's a lot of people, and this is not to put anyone else down, but there's a lot of people online who their exposure, who maybe they're from a more conservative milieu, or maybe they're just mostly online. But when you're actually in the real world and seeing how some of these, critical race theory ideas interact with, real world business, and in our case, real world art, it's not, we're not really bringing new information, but people know these are the conversations that happen. But yeah, no, it's basically just the extreme application of multifaceted affirmative action to art. And when you're faced with that on a day-to-day basis, not only do we each have our own, creative outlets, but also there's a need to talk about this, I think, on a, not even necessarily on a political basis, but just on, acknowledging the fact, which is part of the goal of this podcast, right, is to I guess we can get into our mission statement a little bit, cultivate a space that is outside what we called the cathedral in the Moldbug sense, or the sanction zone for art.
Zone. Yeah.
Our goal is to cultivate an alternative space for people who either have gotten canceled or can't even break in to the sanction zone.
Well, I think it's instructive here, and obviously I'm not going to say this guy's name because we don't want to say people's names who haven't let us say them. But on Indie Thinkers, someone wrote in saying, I have this novel, it's about an honest portrayal of male desire, and how am I going to get an agent? And people like yourself, I think I replied to him through a DM, wrote back and told him, you're not going to get an agent. You cannot write an honest book about the novel about male desire. It's just not going to happen. So the sanction zone, as we call it, the zone of the cathedral, whatever, that type of work is not going to flourish there. But it does. It exists. It exists in the work, as we were saying, of Delicious Tacos, and even in the unpublished work of, well, certainly myself, but also this dude who wrote in on Indie Thinkers, who also wrote a novel, and how many of these novels are floating around out there? So I think what we are doing here is there's like a wilderness of all these, people writing novels that can't get published anywhere, or if they do get published, they're published through alternative presses, and we're creating a venue to, highlight these people and show, give them a place to talk to each other, for people to talk about them, and this is not our land. As we've talked about this metaphor before, Matt, we are building a house on your prairie, and we just want to cultivate the land, make use of it, improve the land. We're improving the land.
The land being the, what for lack of a better term, would be called the Chan zone, or the dissident sphere, or frog Twitter perhaps. And I think that prairie home metaphor, part of the impetus, for that metaphor is basically we're not here to drain the creative energy from the dissident wild and make it more socially acceptable necessarily. We're not trying to further our own careers by tapping into the energy of frog Twitter or something. And as a matter of fact, this, Dan, I think you've said this, this could potentially be very bad for our careers. But I do think that there's something to be said for, there's the kind of the somethingawful.com, very flagrantly offensive element of Chan culture, which is obviously great and probably has influenced each of us in our own way. But I think there's also a place to kind of, the idea of the alternative institution, and this is something that people like Justin Murphy and even Moldbug talk a lot about, where it's not merely the fuck you attitude, and not merely the bringing the real truth brutally to red-pilled light, so to speak, but also a sense of building something new, and building something that is not just the sheer dissident energy, but also looking towards the future, something that can be, a viable alternative to the mainstream, and maybe even outcompete it in terms of quality of art, or outcompete it simply on the basis of being quote unquote red pilled, or having a basis more firmly rooted in the truth, because the cultural sphere as it is, and the political sphere, and the perhaps unfortunate degree to which the cultural and political sphere are married together at this particular point in time in history, is what we're looking at is something very drab and boring. And I think that a lot of people, not only on the cultural right, but a lot of people on the cultural left would agree with that, or people who are simply apolitical, like, for example, Bret Easton Ellis, who I'm sure we'll probably be talking a lot about on this particular episode and this podcast in general. I've talked about the declining state of film and the death of the novel, and the fact that for the last 4, things maybe are changing now, but obviously for Trump's entire tenure, it was all Trump derangement syndrome was basically the
absolutely
prevailing like spirituality or something of all art that was being produced. So looking at that drab, and I don't think it's even that again, I don't think it's that politicized to say drab cultural sphere, the idea of trying to create something new, and trying to take, in large part, taking this dissident frog Twitter energy and seeing what that's going to look like in the 2020s.
And I think it's important to compare. They have the woke people. They have all their podcasts. They have they have publishing companies. They have this. They have that. What we're seeking to do is just to create a little bit of that for us. create
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
structure that they have. I mean, they are getting so much mileage out of shit, out of terrible art, and they're getting the mileage out of it because they have institutions that pump it out. And obviously, we don't have the government on our side. We don't have the big cultural institutions on our side. But that's a process. That means you got to start small, and New Right is maybe the first step on the ladder to New Right Media, or like not us that we're going to do New Right Media. That is not a step on our ladder necessarily, but this is something that will help organize the energy. And
Yeah, but build it and they will come, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think part of what we're saying here, and again, to speak on the prairie home metaphor, I think part of what we're trying to say here, with all respect, is that you and I are not necessarily like the typical people that are kind of in this dissident sphere.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a little more experience with kind of the real world arts community, or maybe even just not that there's a lot of other people like this too, but like we've been shoulder to shoulder with the elite to varying degrees, and we know we have some insider knowledge, kind of like Moldbug a little bit. I mean, we're maybe not on his level, but he's another example of this. Someone who's rubbed shoulders with elites, knows how they work, knows that we're within the cathedral, so to speak. That's not everyone, within the dissident sphere. We have that knowledge of how it operates, and I think that the thought from both of us is that we can kind of put that to use and be helpful to sort of more online type creatives who are, whether for political reasons, economic reasons, whatever, sort of, outside of the cathedral. And that's where that prairie home metaphor comes in. We're not trying to be like, some guys in suits coming into some a western town and trying to wrangle up the cowboys
condo.
or something. What's that?
Building a condo on the prairie.
Yeah,
We're
right.
not building a condo.
Yeah, just that makes sense. Like the metaphor, obviously, there's a reason why I'm saying that we could even be perceived that way, because that's a little bit of we're just trying to acknowledge maybe some of the optics there and say that no, like this is really supposed to be something that will benefit everyone. This isn't a money making scheme by any means. It's
if
merely,
anything, we'll probably lose money if we get canceled. So
right.
This is definitely not a money making scheme.
Yeah. So but we just want to acknowledge that, I guess, potential optic, and anticipate any potential criticisms there, but mostly say that really this is we're just trying to build up the art scene is really all we're trying to do here. And again, having published my novel, not having had a lot of places to go promote it, it's it's the whole build what you want to see in the world thing. I would have loved to have a podcast just like this to come on and do a show on Dragon Age.
You want to see in the world.
Exactly, Gandhi, but yeah.
we
no, but
are
I think
the
that
change.
Exactly. We are the change. That can be our new podcast tagline. But no, that sums up, I think, pretty well what our goal here is. If you want, I think we can transition into talking about our other theme for today, which is there's perhaps no author better. I mean, maybe Delicious Tacos, but up there with Delicious Tacos, few authors better exemplify the kind of writer and kind of novel, if you can even call it a novel, the kind of book that better exemplifies this kind of Chan cultured frog Twitter energy than Mike Ma. And Dan and I had never read Ma previously, but over the past few weeks we picked up his first book, Harassment Architecture, which I believe came out in 2019 originally, and maybe there's been a couple little edits of it since, and then Gothic Violence, which is a new book. It's kind of like the book of the summer, so to speak. I think it came out in July, and we bought it pretty quickly after that. So we were new to Ma, and I think we both enjoyed the books a lot. I'll just say that I'll get right into saying I was very fascinated to learn about Mike Ma's history. I mean, I first kind of learned about him as a name. Maybe I heard Delicious Tacos reference him. Maybe I heard Bronze Age Pervert reference him. He's kind of well connected. I was fascinated and quite excited to learn about his history. So for those who don't know, Mike Ma was basically a Vine comedian back when Vine was a thing, back in like 2014, 2015. Somehow or other, perhaps through his social media clout, I don't know, became like a protege of Milo Yiannopoulos during Milo's golden age of writing for Breitbart. You can still find Mike Ma's articles on Breitbart, which is quite striking. And I don't even think and not to get into this, I don't even think Mike Ma is like that much of a pseudonym or anything. I think that's just what.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I don't think we're doxing him to say it's. Well, fuck, I don't want to say it.
No, I don't want to say it anyway, but yeah, like it's close to his name, and he was a Vine star. He wrote on Breitbart with a picture and everything, and he accompanied Milo on the Dangerous Faggot tour, I suppose. And I just found this fascinating to learn about this guy because when I first got interested in like the dissident right back in 2017, 2018. There was this amazing electrical energy that I think in large part came from it was seeming to break into the mainstream with Breitbart, with Milo, with what is now called, disparagingly, but what is now called the alt-light. And it's kind of fascinating that Mike Ma, he's like pretty good looking, he's about my age kid who is like involved in like the most mainstream facing face of, the dissident right, of the frogs, whatever you want to call it. And that obviously that lightning in a bottle sense with Trump's victory and all that passed away and sort of dried up. But in the meantime, Mike Ma went from that to now being a deeply respected figure on like the more esoteric, more, I would say more extreme, but I don't even want to put it that way. Just more esoteric and underground element of Frog Twitter. Being a friend of Baps and a friend of Delicious Tacos and publishing these rather striking books. So I just found that heartening because in some ways I feel like Ma he's like almost like what when like the mainstream talks about like the alt right, like at this point. I think they feel that they've kind of defeated it. But I remember back in 2017, 2018, the fear was like, oh my God, what if there's like this group of like 20-something, like blonde, decent-looking kids, who look like bullies from 80s movies, who are like well-versed in the culture, but they also have like this American Psycho side. And like they're just going to like take over the world and make Donald Trump dictator. I feel like let's be honest, the reality of the dissident right is a lot more homebound and autistic than that most of the time, just being honest. But there are certain examples of people who really do exemplify that strongest possible image, I suppose, of what like a dissident right kid would be. And Mike Ma really seems like he is the epitome of that. So that's my little monologue to lead us in.
And interestingly, he is. I think we talked about how he's like the man in the room that people don't really know about. And I mean, obviously, he's more well known now after these novels have been published. But at the time, he was a fixture in all of these. Events leading to 2016, but has not really even still become to the extent anyone on the dissident right is a household name. He has is just now kind of emerging to people's attention, and this is like it's very interesting how also someone who is as kind of charismatic, blonde, what have you, has managed to like kind of slide under the radar. But like here we are, and I think the dissident right, the online cultural sphere or whatever is having a Ma moment, as it were.
Definitely. Yeah, it's hard to say how much he slid under the radar because he has this Ted Kaczynski vibe he cultivates where he likes to be off the radar. But no, yeah, that's another good part of what I was trying to say is like he for a movement that has been so much online, that extent to to which Mike Ma was actually in rooms with people and making connections is fascinating. One of the funny things you sent me in the lead up to this conversation was I'm surprised it's not slightly more viral, at least with Ma fans, but Laura Loomer just sexualizing Mike Ma. We'll have to link to it in the description on this podcast. But yeah, another claim to fame, I guess, along with going on tour with Milo, is getting like almost like racially sexualized by Laura Loomer. But
who also racially sexualized herself with
right?
Her,
it's
big, Ashkenazi tits,
IQ and tits, yeah.
and IQ, yes. That's,
right, of course. But that is all to speak mostly about Ma as a person. And obviously, both these books, Harassment Architecture and Gothic Violence, Ma is definitely one of these writers who, the personality and the presence are a big part of the work, big part of the literature. But yeah, it was interesting to read both books back to back. There's a lot that the books have in common. The general themes are basically the same, but there's also some development, kind of from one to the next. I don't know. Did you have some thoughts on sort of the evolution of Ma between Harassment Architecture and Gothic Violence?
So yeah, I definitely did. But I think before we get to the evolution from one to the other, maybe we highlight what we liked about Harassment Architecture and indeed about Gothic Violence as well. Where it's really delivering the type of art that we don't have right now.
Right.
And the moment that stood out to me in Harassment Architecture is it should go without saying, or maybe it shouldn't go without saying, but Mike Ma is writing from the perspective of a straight white guy who, it's hard to tell what is satire, what is not satire, but let's just say he's not woke. And so he is in one part of Harassment Architecture online behind some AOC girl with some indie band t-shirt, and he notices the t-shirt and he's like, oh, we could like each other, and she's hot and I might want to bang her, and I'm good looking too, maybe she would find me charming. But then he remembers that if she knew his political views, she would hate him. And in I think a moment of some honesty, because he puts up a very hard front, he said that he wouldn't, he doesn't automatically hate her, but he knows that she will automatically hate him, which makes him feel obligated to automatically hate her. And that really crystallized for me actually a feeling that I have had as well, because if you are raised in on the coasts among the liberal elites or what have you, you will be friends with people who, if they knew your political beliefs, they would just feel visceral disgust, and you don't necessarily feel visceral disgust for them because they're part of the hegemonic narrative. So we are confronted with something we hate every day, and so we've just grown inured to it. It's oh, of course you have ridiculous, shitty beliefs, and so we don't naturally hate the AOC girl, but they naturally, at least in Ma's estimation, and I think he's probably right there, naturally do hate you. And so in that moment, that's kind of and throughout Harassment Architecture, there are times where, and Gothic Violence, where he kind of drills down into what based straight white men are thinking these days.
I think so. Yeah. No, we talked about this section previously. I'm kind of almost having some new thoughts on it now, and I think that really gets to the heart of the conundrum that is Mike Ma. I mean, These books, there's plenty in here to shock the average reader. There's some sections where he sounds quite a lot like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, describing thoughts of violence and violence against women. There's a whole theme of accelerationism, which we'll get into, and about, basically, immanentizing the end of society through random and sometimes quite hilarious actions of destruction. Obviously, there's a lot of overtly dark and even violent and politically extreme elements of harassment architecture and Gothic violence both. But the overwhelming, and this is, I think, is also at the heart of my fascination with Ma, the overwhelming impression I get watching such things as his Vine reel from 2015, which is available online, listening to the Spotify playlist he has made, which is called the Mike Ma Mega Playlist, and I these are a lot of songs on it are also near and dear to my heart. It's basically this long indie rock playlist he's put together. And the music is relevant to the section we're talking about too, from Harassment Architecture, with the girl in the Crystal Castle shirt, because he talks about how it's not just her, but also the bands that they both love, have these politics. Another section that comes to mind that sort of underlies this more light-hearted element of Ma is it's like the second chapter in Gothic Violence, or maybe the third or fourth chapter, but when there's a sort of riff on Bret Easton Ellis's Glamorama, where he's walking around this party in the Hollywood Hills. He name drop to a comedic degree, as Bret does in Glamorama, name drops maybe 50 sort of current celebrities, everyone from the cast of Euphoria and Stranger Things to Ty Segall, the punk rocker Ty Segall. I guess he's more of an indie rocker. Anyway,
To Victor Ward.
And there's even an explicit homage to Glamorama, name dropping the main character in that, Victor Ward, as if he's any other celebrity. But anyway, I say all this because the fascinating thing about him is he has this overtly, someone would say, hateful book, but he seems like an affable guy, and he's a guy that I can relate to. He's about my age. We listen to the same music. Him, myself, and I guess this girl in the Crystal Castle shirt. He's not. He wants to revolt against the modern world, right, in an extreme degree. But at the same time, like he's kind of just. He seems like a nice guy. Is kind of what I'm trying to say, and he's invested in all these things. Yeah, there's that dichotomy, and what he's saying is, yes, it's that maybe he could have some semblance of a satisfying life, just being a normal millennial guy and kind of shoving the red-pilled truths aside. But what he's saying is you shouldn't go down that easy. These inner misgivings, these inner deep misgivings you have about modernity. Yes, it would be probably easier to just kind of shove those to the side. But I mean, Ma himself, what he exemplifies in his writing and his work is taking those misgivings and leaning into them. Rather than leaning away from them, leaning into them and exploring. Even such things that BAP explores as well, like to what degree is our food supply poisoning in us? Should the modern world just be totally destroyed? It's like he's a normal guy, but he leans into that element, and I feel like these books. I don't know Mike Ma, but I've seen these videos. I feel like if you know him in real life, he's probably a pretty normal dude. But he has these books that are the sort of catalog of these dark thoughts of his. Which that might be a good segue, because you had some nuanced takes on the idea of these books as a catalog for dark thoughts, right?
Well, I would say the books kind of combine. There are those takes that I love of like being a kind of very based white guy and living in a liberal world, and then there's this accelerationist, eco-fascist narrative, which is something we'll get into in a little bit, and that's very interesting too. And I do have to say, sandwiched in between, we do have a lot of the Bateman-esque stuff and the politically extreme, shall we say, elements are just kind of not on the same level of insight and originality as the other stuff. Like when he's, like, for instance, in the jungle, hunting gorillas, not gorillas, the animal kind that we love, but the enemy fighters. It's just kind of like, whoa, the Tom Clancy thing.
Yeah.
And when he's pushing the bookcase over on the girl in Harassment Architecture, and watching her die, like it stuff like that. Yeah, that does affect you because it's. But I think, as I was saying, it's like pyrotechnics. It's like special effects.
Right.
And well, what does it really add? And so what I see here is, like, in Harassment Architecture and in Gothic Violence, you have a lot of really interesting moments of, like, Mike being giving his probably honest thoughts of, like, what it's like to be, a dude in the modern world, liberal world of Cathedral. And this kind of narrative, which Gothic Violence builds the narrative, and it creates a narrative structure of surfer jihadists who are trying to accelerate the collapse of society, and that's the kind of meat, in my opinion, of what he has here. And at first, I was a little more skeptical of the eco-fascist narrative than you were, Matt, and just thought it was kind of like, okay, more kind of like harnessing Bateman-like energy for, shock value, frankly. But there's more than that. And obviously, we'll talk about it, but he's the founder of arguably, involved in the formation of the Pine Tree movement. And there are ties to right-wing esotericism, ties to, at least ideological ties to BAP. And
for sure.
And so in the narrative that he's crafted to, like, advance this right-wing environmental agenda, there's something new there. There's something interesting there, which, we don't really, it's not chaos for the sake of chaos. It's chaos for the sake of this, kind of Kaczynski-like agenda that is only just being sketched out, we feel, in the kind of, it's beginning to rise from, or, permeate into the cathedral, the outside of the wilds of Frog Twitter and the Chan zones. Even people in the more cathedral-like places, they're beginning to notice there is this right-wing environmental movement going on, and that's new. That's interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, that's another element of the background I had on Ma before realizing he was this, former Milo associate, etc. I thought he was just he'd been introduced to me sort of as like a right wing, a right wing environmentalist, which kind of gave me the wrong idea, because I think that he is a right wing environmentalist. He is at least, again, where does the satire end? Where does the sincerity begin? But nevertheless, in the books, at least comes across as an advocate of eco-terrorism. But this isn't necessarily Greta Thunberg on a bad day or something, and it's definitely not some weepy, more edgy version of, like, the what you'd see on the back bumper of a Prius about the environment. It's a very different milieu. I mean, Ma says that he sees, the climax of Harassment Architecture. I see God in trees. I see God in raw meat. It's this, his environmentalism starts, I think, out of an adulation of nature and of the hierarchy inherent in nature, of the purity, perhaps most of all, of nature. And the fascist part, so to speak, or the terroristic motivation, comes from a desire to bring that purity and perhaps that hierarchy into the realm of politics, and take man who has degraded nature, and kind of facilitate being a force for nature taking that back or something. But he doesn't spill a lot of ink about all the plastic in the ocean. I mean, I'm sure he's not thrilled about that either, but mostly it's less, it's more simple than that almost. It's like looking out the window and seeing God in the trees and being motivated by that. You know what I mean?
It is not about veganism. It is not about
certainly not. It's about eating raw meat. Yeah.
It's about, and this is why I think, and this is maybe even going a bit outside the text here, left-wing environmentalism is inherently contradictory, whereas right-wing environmentalism, to embrace the environment, and I think Ma has the right idea here, you have to embrace a natural order. You have to embrace hierarchies. And I don't think we have to really belabor that the left does not like to embrace natural. They like to embrace unnatural hierarchies, but not natural hierarchies.
100%, yeah. No, you're right. They like to embrace. I basically wouldn't stop at saying it's inherently contradictory. I mean, I think that, I don't know, the association between the left and environmentalism in the United States, it's actually more strong in the United States than it is in Europe, is my understanding, by the way. But certainly over here, I think it's a combination of one, the kind of Christian right having a history of being dismissive of environmental concerns. And then on the other hand, I also think it has to do with the degree to which maybe capitalism can be blamed for a certain amount of environmental destruction. Ma doesn't write about economic matters a lot, but I think we can conclude that he's not a commie or a socialist, but also he doesn't see the free market as the solution to anything. But anyway, I think that's why there's a association between environmentalism and the left in the United States and in the West more broadly. But yeah, I think when you get right down to the root of it, of really taking environmentalism seriously, not just having it as another set of concerns like, oh, we have to be nice to minorities, and nature is just another minority. Like, I think that sums up the typical liberal attitude towards the environment. It's something much more radical. It's
that we have to return to hierarchies. We have to return to codes, and we've been living outside of these codes for too long, and it's made us sick. That's basically it.
And that's classic new right, not new right like our podcast, but that's classic like a new right, like the French new right, and like the Evolian right, etc. Even history and fascism. Like that's it's a well precedented point of view. And Ma doesn't spill a lot of ink. These books are not. It's worth getting into this more generally for people who haven't. I feel like some of the listeners to this will not have read the books. I mean, they're not political tirades at all. They're not even really novels either. They're basically just a series of vignettes. And what you get is what we're talking about with environmentalism is over the course of 100 odd, maybe more vignettes that Ma lays out in Harassment Architecture and Gothic Violence. Both is this view of nature and this politicization of that, but it emerges through very intriguingly specific details that slowly emerge through, basically personal vignettes, like delicious tacos. Yeah.
I think there's one line that really kind of summarizes Ma's view of what man's relationship to nature should be and what it is not currently. And this is at the end of Gothic Violence. And this is after, I mean, I don't know, do we want to do spoilers here? Maybe not.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
I think we can. Go for it.
Okay, so spoilers. The surfer jihadists institute a new government in Florida after reclaiming it from the United States. And so it's become a sort of new Atlantis. He refers to it as the new Atlantis.
Yes.
And he writes, in the same way that mainland America revolves its culture around things like media consumption, wage slavery, celebrities, sports, and individualism, this new Atlantis revolves around sun and surf worship, unbreakable bonds with nature, tribalism, child making, ridding of toxins through diet, literature, beauty, and the erasure of nihilism.
Yeah, it's kind of satisfying because, as I said, these books are basically a series of vignettes. But I was somewhat satisfied, I would say, at the end of Gothic Violence. He kind of brought it all together and gave a more clear view of the type of society he would want to live in, I guess. And you see that environmental element there, in that hierarchical element that we discussed. But it's also interesting because, and I don't want to be reductive here, but I think that harassment architecture and most of Gothic Violence could be described as works advocating or at least playing with the idea of accelerationism, which we also talked about, basically that this world, like the Jack Donovan quote, which Ma brings up in one of his footnotes, this world the modern world is a drunk that just hasn't quite fallen over, and we just need to push him over the edge. That's kind of what Ma, what Ma comes back to.
Nick Land and a couple of other theorists. There's even maybe even further back history than that, but Ma, he illustrates it in a colorful way. He talks about smashing the windows of every car at the car dealer. He talks about all these little ways that you can create chaos every day. I mean, that's one of my favorite. It's perhaps dangerous, but it's one of my one of the most memorable elements of these books for me is the degree to which Ma can pinpoint these little ways. Like there's even a couple of like satirical posters in the back of Harassment Architecture that say things like become chaos, become the butterfly effect, carry a Sharpie across town, and cross out everything written in Spanish, and we can have Rome again if you break enough BMW windows. That's a recurring theme for Ma that I enjoyed. And that is his packaging. That is his ability to market this, which is something we've talked about. How it's part of his appeal. It's not just the literature. It's not just the novel. It's it's him. It's his his persona. His the artwork that it comes packaged in, and it really perfectly encapsulated in those ads at the end of Harassment Architecture.
Yeah, it's kind of it reminds me of the aesthetic of like $1 Million Extreme a little bit, where it's like this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well edited, very up to the present in terms of like meme culture, but and very aesthetically pleasing, but with a very subversive edge type packaging.
Like what if Sam Hyde wrote a novel? Maybe.
They did actually. By the way, we should maybe talk about it on a future show. It's called.
Talk about that.
You know what it's called? It's called How to Bomb the U.S. Government. I want to buy this book. Yeah.
Oh wow.
We'll do a show on it. I mean, I'm gonna probably pick it up from Amazon. But very similar aesthetic. Sam Hyde is another example of someone who. He's a dissident right figure, but he was like impressively close to power. With Ma, it said he wrote for Breitbart. With Sam Hyde, it's perhaps even more strikingly that he had a Cartoon Network show. Oh, well, hopefully not too repetitive, the Perfume Nationalist episode on MD, but we should do $1 Million Extreme Sam Hyde show at some point.
Well, I mean, like,
anyway,
the novel, clearly, if I didn't know about that. So.
Yeah, no, it might be hard to get because of its controversial title, but we'll get it. I don't even actually know that much of what I assume it's kind of like Harassment Architecture, but we'll talk about that. But no, basically why I was talking about this is I in my book, I'm just gonna shamelessly plug my book again. In my book, Dragon Day, there's like one section where the kind of darker figure, I won't call him the villain, but like the darker figure in the book sort of lays out some potential ways to sow chaos in this sort of way, in terms of like just committing horrific act. Like if it's what you want, you just gotta follow your will and like just do this chaotic shit. And I had that for like 3 pages. Like, wow, my book has some edge. But Ma has basically
the whole
book, or 2 books now, laying that out. But I want to say, even though as much as I enjoyed that, and the sections about surfers beating up people for littering on the beach and stuff, as much as I enjoy those sections, it's kind of interesting how Gothic Violence finally takes the next step. So it's like so much of Ma is this world is evil, and we need to bring an end to it through accelerationism. so much of both books is about that. But then by the end of Gothic Violence, it does have a narratively satisfying thing where it's like, and we did it in Florida. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it brings it to an interesting close. And there's, I would say a surprisingly cogent sort of manifesto at the end. And also, I found it surprisingly trad, so to speak. Because we talked previously about how like there's a tension between the trad, quote unquote, trad types and the quote unquote accelerationist types. But with Ma, you actually see in some of his description of the life they lead as a society in Florida, he actually references the Amish a couple of times. So you can see that maybe for him that tension's a little bit, it's the traditionalism on the other side of the collapse.
Yeah, accelerating into trad. And in that, you could see that paralleled, I think, in his novels. Harassment Architecture being, I would say, a bit harder edged than Gothic Violence. He's not, but then, we get into Gothic Violence, and, he does have that chapter on how birth control makes women unfeminine, and that is, could of course be interpreted as hatred for women, but it could also be interpreted, and he does make clear that he appreciates femininity and motherhood, and he wants to, embrace that and have, presumably, have a society where, a more traditional society.
Yeah, no, I think that chapter is probably one of my favorite ones from the later part of Gothic Violence. He talks about how birth control ruins a woman, right? And most people reading that will say, your average normie reading it would say, oh, this is misogynistic, this is sexist. But what I took from it was what he says about women who are not on birth control. There's like inherent to his criticisms of modernity. And this sums up him a lot, I think. Inherent to his criticisms of modernity, in this case, birth control, on the other side is that it can be better, that there is a purity that underlies the decay. And the way he describes, the maternal presence of women, and elsewhere in the book too, the maternal presence of women who are actually worthwhile, and in his view, are not, they're not on birth control, shows you that, that more hopeful, wholesome side of his work.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And that's, he ends it in a hopeful place, I would say. Gothic Violence.
Yeah, he does. He ends it in a hopeful place. I mean, he doesn't end it in a place where there's he's as much of a heretic, if not more than ever, but nevertheless, I think it ends on a more hopeful note than Harassment Architecture, which kind of just ends in an angry rant.
Yeah.
But both books are great, really. But in terms of accelerationism, the acceleration of it all, there was a kind of a topic on that. One last topic on that I wanted to touch on is, I guess I'll pose it as a question: like, is it irresponsible to to deal with accelerationism in this way? I mean, I've had a kind of mixed take on this throughout my online career, and my book, my Dragon Day, in some ways, is a warning against certain elements of accelerationism, but because I think that the notion that everything has to be destroyed could probably be pretty destructive for a lot of people in their personal lives, etc.
Of course, yeah.
I
think
I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Yeah.
Accelerationism, like obviously, like all the various schemes that Ma lays out in both Harassment Architecture and especially Gothic Violence, is potentially very dangerous. People read it and do it. That's that's going to be very bad.
And I don't even really want to say this, but maybe I should, because our goal always is to be honest. There was a case, and this didn't turn into anything, but it's also kind of funny too, if we're being honest in a dark way. There was this case, and I talked about this with Matt Forney on the podcast on my book. There was a case earlier this year where this guy, I guess the FBI or something, like flouted some neo-Nazis like plan to, I don't know if it was going to be a mass shooting or a bombing or what, but it was ended before it started. It was stopped before it even started. But this guy, he had a copy of Revolt Against the Modern World, and he had
Harassment Architecture.
and he had harassment architecture. So look, I'm never the type to. I think that artists are very rarely, if not never, at fault for what crazy people do with their work. But nevertheless, it is worth noting that in the wrong hands, yes, some people could maybe take some of the more extreme sections of these books too literally. But I also did want to say, even though I think there is a danger to taking accelerationism too much at face value, I think that the power of the notion of accelerationism can't be denied, and that it's far superior to LARPy trad stuff, and that advocating, basically especially when it comes to, I think, hijacking elements of popular culture, that accelerationism has a certain power that can't be ignored.
I agree with that, and also just bringing this back to being an art podcast, essentially literature podcast. I don't think we can, even if something is dangerous, as long as it has literary value, it's still, it should be talked about. It should be read, or it should not be read if it sucks. But if it's good, it should be read. And I think we do have to weigh the literary value versus the potentially socially irresponsible consequences of producing certain works. And
we're certainly on the same page there.
Yeah, and if you have a book that is just like, this is a book how to make a bomb, maybe that shouldn't be so widely available. But if you have a book that is like Harassment Architecture, which has clear literary value, or Gothic Violence, even the more, I would say some of the more extreme elements do detract from its overall appeal, but they don't, and this is where I think we differ from the boys and girls in the cathedral. We think it should still be read, even if it's dangerous. Well, if it's art, we should still read it, because we're all big boys and girls, and we can read things, and even if they cause a stir, it'll be okay. God knows the left has a lot of stuff that's dangerous that they read and promote. So, fair is fair. We've been talking about the extent to which Ma's accelerationism is potentially socially irresponsible, and we would really be remiss if we didn't also discuss the extent to which I don't know if it's really his being socially irresponsible or just simply holding these views, but he does, in Gothic Violence at least, voice opinions that present favorable views of the Nazis and the Confederates, and this does pose a little some issues for some readers, for us, at least for myself. And I think naturally we are a pod that our goal is to get away from this sort of policing of literature and this sort of, like, you can't say this, you can't say that. And if it were the case that Ma were just writing straight fiction, and it is important to take into account that he himself says this is a satire, so that is an important thing to consider. That being said, his persona is very similar to that of the books. So we do have to consider that these views are potentially his own, and if that is the case, we can enjoy the rest, and we do enjoy the rest of his works, but we have to come out and say that genocide and chattel slavery are not new right values, and
of course we disavow, so to speak. I found the execution in Gothic Violence, and this is possible because I've exposed myself to more overt extremism online. So Gothic Violence and Harassment Architecture feel kind of subtle and artful in their presentation of such ideas in contrast. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that as I've said it before, and we'll say it again, where the satire begins and ends with Ma is completely unclear. And yeah, no, our podcast is exploratory of a lot of these writers and even of some of these ideas, certainly without endeavoring to make the more extreme elements necessarily more respectable.
Definitely.
I just wanted to also add that, like, I think that accelerationism can be dangerous when taken too much at face value. The whole idea of, not so much using put it this way. I think that accelerationism, when taken too much at face value in terms of like going out and killing somebody, obviously that it gets sketchy, and that's not a good path for anyone because you're just going to get arrested, not even to touch on moral matters. But there are certain elements of accelerationism, and it's not that Mike Ma so much explicitly advocates this, but other thinkers like Nick Land and Alexander Dugin, to an extent, have spoken on this. The whole notion of flipping the postmodern paradigm on its head is very appealing to me. And I always go back to this. I think there's a lot of value in, the Vermeulen. Well, I think there's some value in like the Vermeulen types and just social conservatism and traditionalism in general, advocating, starting the family and supporting your family, blah, 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 blah. And political integralism. All of that has its place. But I have to say, if we look at the most interesting stuff that's happened politically for the past decade, none of it is of a socially conservative, per se, nature so much. No one's out. It's not like not even to just like take a typical alt-right whipping boy, but none of it's like what Ben Shapiro would advocate. None of it's even what like Rod Dreher would advocate. What it actually is game show host as president, meme war victor. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's for better or worse. We don't have to be extreme accelerationists, but I do think that we have to. There's really something to that idea of diving into the modern and postmodern world as it is, and flipping on its head, causing chaos responsibly, right? I think that's my, I guess, quote unquote, well-adjusted take from people like Ma, is that, basically we need to, and also like that $1 million extreme aesthetic we're talking about, like taking the postmodern world as it is and using it against itself where possible. And I think that also interacts with what we do, because both you and I, we're not really trad types, to say the least.
We're in the belly of the beast.
We're in the belly of the beast, and our goal here is to interact with popular culture as it is, find out what's redeemable in it, and find out also, use what is execrable in it against itself. Exactly. As the case might be. I mean, that is very much more. That notion is much more inspiring to me than the LARPy trad stuff. Exactly. And Mike Ma, I think, is an example of, both subverting popular culture, but also, the better elements of the trad stuff and the socially conservative stuff.
The stuff that went over, that won, that like in wrestling, it's like you put the story over. That's what they say. And the stuff that caught on, Trump winning, Brexit, what have you, that has its roots in the generative capacity of this wild west of 4chan, of Frog Twitter, of this untamed zone on the internet.
It does. It has its roots in that energy, which again, it's a goal of ours to help to cultivate and yeah, no, there's ironies to it. The Ted Kaczynski line, perhaps the Pine Tree Party line is, let's disable the electricity grid. Well, none of us would be here and on this corner of the internet without the electricity grid. So there's this. What's that?
Can't meme without electricity.
Exactly, can't meme without electricity. So there's that. It's not a contradiction. It's just a certain irony, and I think it's a generative irony.
Yeah.
To have your feet in different circles, and
But
kind of bring
you're
it together. That's where the magic happens,
you're
right?
quite right. Where you compare to Vermeulen, where you compare to the social conservatives, and they haven't delivered much of anything because they're not cool. It's fucking lame, and it's not going to deliver because what you need to push a narrative across and have it gather steam and catch on, it has to be cool. It has to be something that people like
Yeah.
reading, like watching, and it's this tool that is largely untapped potential of the I don't know, the dissident movement. I don't know what we want to call it exactly, but there is this energy that's creative, that's artistic, and that the other side just doesn't have. They don't have.
Right.
Just
They don't. And that's why people, make fun of him for being alt-right, but I think Milo was a pretty thrilling figure, and I think Ma is a protege of Milo still, not in every way, and his ideology is obviously quite different, but yeah, Milo is a great example of this, of someone who took our culture's love of gay men, for example, and just completely flipped it on its head in 2016.
Absolutely.
And that stuff is really powerful, and there is an accelerationism to that. But it's also extremely effective and extremely exciting, and something that I, as a consumer of culture, both enjoy, watching, but also enjoy kind of being inspired by. Another interesting thing in Mike Ma that I found was the sort of intriguing spiritual / religious elements. And I tweeted something about this that Ma actually retweeted, and I got a bunch of likes.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if this is so much something you're interested in, but do you kind of? I kind of got the rumblings, especially in Gothic Violence, and there's a section where he sort of name drops the title, the title Gothic Violence, where he reflects on the sort of spiritual paths that we have open to us, and he says. This is the inevitable path of certain men, not occultism, but the rituals of it, not darkness, but a closeness to it. And I found that section really intriguing. I'd also recently read, I frequently check back on the Wikipedia page of Bronze Age Pervert to see what the official narrative on BAP is. And I guess some scholar or other made some point that if ever a religion were to rise out of the ashes of the alt-right, BAP would perhaps be seen as one of its progenitors. And not to get onto weird esoteric topics per se, but I did find myself thinking about that reading Ma. Is this, what are the rumblings here of this spiritual religious awakening rising out of the ashes of the dissident right? I mean, the reason I find it intriguing is because in other sections, Ma basically calls himself a Christian, and certainly he seems monotheistic. And then you have BAP, who he's got a very pagan aesthetic, but in other ways, his energy is very solar and almost monotheistic as well. So I don't know if you have thoughts on this. I don't even know if I'll put this in the recorded version. I just couldn't help, and it corresponds a little bit with the accelerationist stuff. There's this element of Ma, and you get a little bit in BAP too, but where it's an embrace of a closeness to darkness and as he says, the rituals of the occult without being the actual cult, but will still be grounding in this right hand path, monotheistic traditionalism. I think we don't have to riff on this long. I think all I'm describing here is the sort of more spiritual religious dimension of that accelerationist to trad dichotomy. But I definitely find it interesting. I mean, I don't think it'd necessarily be good if there was some weird religious movement that came out of Twitter, but at the same time, it's definitely an intriguing thought, and I can't help but think, because, as we said, the Vermeulas, the trad caths of the world, don't seem so effective about getting their ideas across. Is this combination of
I
a
think
certain
so.
accelerationist logic with the
He,
ethical monotheism. Yeah.
BAP has already succeeded in this regard. You have, legions of Bapists who embrace what he promulgates, which, I'm not as well read in BAP as you, but I think it's not unfair to say that he promulgates a red pilling, as it were, a return to natural hierarchies, natural traditions, and that is the sun and steel. That is the religion. That is It is a religious act, according to BAP, according to Ma, I would say, to embrace nature, to embrace natural hierarchy.
Yeah, and the subtlety of the message, what makes them different from some dork. And there's a meme going around recently where it's like, I won't even get into the weeds of it, but like where it's like a Chad meme lifting weights, and it's like, I learned to go to church and not eat fast food, and like, it's like, yes, that's important, but the subtlety in the message of someone like BAP and someone like Ma is that you need to do that, but you also need to be acquainted, and this is in the last chapter of Bronze Age Mindset laid out too. You have to be acquainted with the underworld, with the disgustingness and the filthiness of this world and of the modern world, and a close acquaintance of that without giving into it, without being a Satanist and without being an occultist, is the other piece of the puzzle that you need in order in order for your politics not just to be self-help. And I don't think it's a fully articulated thought yet, but I think that BAP and Ma are like on the case of articulating what that could mean. And as someone who's of an artistic temperament and also someone who's of a religious temperament, I'm very intrigued to see how this evolves.
Yeah. I would say the question of, is Ma a Christian? Is BAP a Christian? Is, it's not even exactly the right question. It's more, to what extent does an embrace of nature and, man's natural qualities, to what extent is that Christian?
Yeah, no, that is the question.
And does that fit under Christianity? And I think, I don't know as much about BAP. We've read a bit of Ma now, and I think they're, to an extent agnostic about, whether, obviously there's the cultural signifiers of, being a Christian and wanting to preserve that cultural heritage. But I think Ma's, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Ma's religion is a worship of man's capacities, not unembellished capacities, natural capacities. And to the extent that can coexist with monotheism, that's great. To the extent and also this actually, I'm thinking of this right now, at the end of Gothic Violence, there is a moment where he gets very psychedelic, where he starts talking about the oneness of things and how everything has been alive forever. And I don't think we've discussed this ourselves, but
no, but it's great stuff. Yeah.
But I don't know if you've ever taken psychedelics, but I have, and the oneness of things, and that's something like, after a trip, you're just like, yes, and living forever. It's the sense that nothing ever dies, and it's clear to me that Ma, had some type of psychedelic motivation while he was writing that.
Oh, I think so. I'll just say, because I don't mind getting more personal, I've never taken psychedelics just due to fear of how it interact with, I guess, anxiety or my own neurosis. But I think that people do have very worthwhile experiences on it. It sounds like you have. And I don't remember if Ma explicitly references psychedelics, but I would say that there's absolutely no fucking doubt that he has. Again, even just going back to that Spotify playlist, most people who listen to certain types of indie rock, But no, there is a psychedelic dimension, and
that is
about the oneness of things.
Thing. That
It
is
is, yeah.
this sort of like oneness and never-endingness of life is coexistent with the transcendent qualities of man, and
Right.
each man born is going to have those same qualities throughout history,
Yeah.
because genetics of what have you, and that too is there's a certain in Christianity, the Trinity, the Holy Ghost, there's a certain element of mysticism in Christianity as well.
There is. No,
Go on.
no, sorry. It's just fascinating with Ma, maybe especially in Gothic Violence. I think his answer is, I mean, I don't know if he's explicitly called himself a Christian, but he's very, very interested in Jesus and interested in Christianity. And the impression I get is, he garners his spirituality. Yeah, he's probably had some psychedelic experiences. He's almost like a nature worshiper. But I think that there's a real argument that you get throughout it that no, this stuff is not in contradiction with monotheism at all. The line at the end of Harassment Architecture is, I see God in pine trees. It's not, I worship pine trees. It's, I see God in pine trees. I see
True.
God in raw meat. And I've actually, just again, it's worthwhile being personal with some of this stuff. Like, I grew up Catholic. I still attend church, but I'm not a devout Catholic, but I still find a significant amount of value in going to church and worshiping God and praying, etc. But I also, I'm a bit of a Baptist, and there's a pagan element to that. I'm lifting weights and I'm looking at the sun and I'm thinking, why don't I just worship the sun? But then I think, like, the sun is just a ball of flame out there. But maybe it's the most powerful symbol of something transcendently existent. And for me, sun worship is like, you'd have to talk to someone like Camille Paglia or like a anthropologist, but it's like the notion of like again, solar, like a more solar paganism, which you get in BAP. BAP is very solar pagan, you know what I'm saying? That almost is like a step towards monotheism, because it's still, there's only one sun, and, it
Sure.
is the bringer of all light. So it's like again, tapping into paganism and the raw energy. It's a little bit like the podcast too, right? It's like the raw energy of primordial paganism, but like also bringing it in line with some structure, with something more structured, like traditional Catholicism or Christianity. I think that we're like, again, it's kind of lines up metaphorically with some of the other topics we've talked about in a nice way. I think we're seeing the first rumblings of like taking that sort of in someone like Ma and Ba, taking that pagan occultist energy and like refining that as the roots of something much more structured and above board and right hand path in the occultist sense, and applying a structure to it, which is at least not inimical to Christianity, if not just a new era of Christianity almost. And that these are heady topics, but worthwhile. I'm glad we talked about them.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, a new religion shall arise.
Yes. Or the old religion, but updated to fight on the modern battlefield.
That's our second podcast, the new religion. So we are looking forward to finding new voices, and just helping new voices find other new voices in this world that doesn't really have the same institutions that they have on the inside.
Yeah.
Because like this is where the real art is. It's not in there. In there, like, it's all dead. You can't produce art in an environment that is like heavily censored.
Yeah.
Because you need truth for art, and so we've got that here. We have all the natural resources.
Yep, the creative energy has dried up for the mainstream, and I think our goal is to be a conduit, a canal for this energy, and to help to bring it into this new decade, the 2020s, and see where it goes from there. But I think that's a pretty good wrap up to our first episode.